Greetings, everyone. Let me say peace, love, light to you all, to all that is watching, to all that will be joining. Peace and love to you all. May all be well with you, with your loved ones, and everything that you're doing in your everyday life. uh, Came across some information that I want to share with you guys, which will look at history from a different angle, a different perspective when it comes to putting all the puzzle pieces together as far as the transatlantic slave trade, as far as gentrification, as far as eminent domain. These histories vast, and throughout certain centuries, generations, history has been rewritten over and over and over again. Some truths, some manipulations, but everything in life has a pattern to it. Even a liar has a pattern to how they lie. Get me? So once you're able to puzzle the pieces together, everything becomes clear, and truth shall always reign and come to light. It's just up to those who are willing to do the research. And that's why it's so few of us that come to true enlightenment of history, of self, of this world, and beyond, right? So, with no further ado, let's get into it. Let me say peace and love to everyone that is in the chat right now. Michelle Marquise, Sean Allen, Lance Ward, Brother Original Lone Wolf, Brother Jaguar, Clement Applewhite. Wait, honor to you all. Honor to you all. Uh, Let me get my screen share up and going, and we're going to get into this. All right. Give me 1 second here. Uh, ooh, wait, where is it? Where's my screen share? Hold on now. See, it's been so long since I've done a stream. Oh man, I'm trying to figure out everything back all over again. The whole screen share. Where is it? Why am I not seeing it? If I don't see it, I'm just gonna read the information that I have and put the link in the link to it in the chat. Right? It used to just have the screen share button. Unless it's me. I think it's me. Let's see. Okay, I found it. It's me. All right, so here we go. Let me know if you guys can see the screen share. All right. Let me know if you guys could see it. So this is from, and look, this is for children. Coolie facts for kids. Okay. If it's blurred on your end, you would have to manually set your settings. On your YouTube, you'd have to go to the settings option where it says quality and hit on the resolution that you want it to be on, and it will clear right up. All right. All right, so let's get to it. Coolie facts for kids, because the word coolie is not what people think it is. It's bigger than what you think it is. And this is going to be a series, because we're going to break down even the myth of what is called of the name Africa, because we all know, those who know that that entire region from the Middle East onward to what they call South, West, and North Africa, going back up into China, all that was called Asia at one point, at almost at its earliest peak. All right, so here we go. A coolie, also spelled coolie, 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 or coolie, is a term for a low wage laborer, typically of South Asian or East Asian descent. The reason why this is important, because majority of the folks in the Middle East identify as Asians. Folks in Syria, they identify as West Asians. This is important, right? The word coolie was first popularized in the 16th century by European traders across Asia, and by the 18th century would refer to migrant Indian indentured laborers. And by the 19th century, during the British colonial era, would gain a new definition of the systemic shipping and hiring of Asian workers under contract on plantations that had been formerly worked by enslaved Africans. Now, that part is foolishness, but we're going to get to that. The word has had a variety of other implications and is sometimes regarded as offensive or a pejorative, depending upon the historical and geographical context. In India, its country of origin, it is still considered a derogatory slur. It is similar in many respects to Spanish term peon, although both terms are used in some countries with different implications. Now, let me also say this. In China, the people who are dark skinned Chinese, or what you call black Chinese, the original ones, because of their complexion, they are subjugated or cornered in areas of China to where they are identified as peasants, slaves, workers. This is what they're identified as. This is why when you go into the major Chinese cities, you hardly see any dark skinned faces. And this is why when an Negro person visits China from the Americas, they act like it's their first time ever seeing a dark skinned person. Pay attention now. It's not that they're not there, they're there. They're just blocked off from the rest of the world, because these folks' identity are their definition of beauty means to get rid of the darker you. But anyway, let's not stray. Let's not stray. Where were we? The word has had a variety of other implications, and is sometimes regarded as offensive or a pejorative, depending upon the historical and geographical context. In India, its country of origin, it is still considered a derogatory slur. It is similar in many respects to the Spanish term peon. although both terms are used in some countries with different implications. The word originated in the 17th century Indian subcontinent. Now, what is an Indian subcontinent? What is that? Now, let's click to see what that is. Indian subcontinent. The Indian subcontinent is a term mainly used for the geographic region surrounded by the Indian Ocean, the Republic of India, Pakistan, Kashmir, and then they have disputed region, Nepal, Sikkim, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Myanmar, and few others. The subcontinent was once part of Gondwana, the ancient southern supercontinent. Although the term Indian subcontinent and South Asia are often used interchangeably to denote the region, the geographical term of South Asia frequently includes Afghanistan, which is not considered part of the subcontinent, but it frequently includes Afghanistan. Now, what would we say Afghanistan and Pakistan is? We'll say that's in the Middle East, right? And I brought up those two names because those are the two names that we're mostly um, familiar with. That's always in the news. Pakistan, Afghanistan, um, Palestine, Syria, Libya, Iraq, right? In many historical sources, the region surrounding the region surrounding and southeast of the Indus River was referred to simply as India. Historians continue to use the term to refer to the whole of Indian subcontinent in discussion of history up until the era of the British Raj. During this period, India came to refer to a distinct political entity that later became a nation state. Hmm. Does that name sound familiar? How many times have you ever heard nation state being said here in the Americas? Nation state, nation state, nation state. But I digress. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the term subcontinent signifies a subdivision of a continent which has a distinct geographical, political, or cultural identity, and also a large landmass somewhat smaller than a continent. Its use to signify the Indian subcontinent is evidenced from the early 20th century when most of the territory was either part of the British Empire or allied with them. It was a convenient term to refer to the region comprising both British India and the princely states. Hmm. The term has been particularly common in the British Empire and its successors, while the term South Asia is the more common usage in Europe and North America. They're Asians. The entire continent, that entire region was originally called Asia. Remember Asia Major, Asia Minor? The subcontinent was formerly part of Gondwana, a supercontinent formed during the late Neo-Proterozoic and the Paleozoic. Gondwana began to break up during the Mesozoic, with insular India separating from Antarctica. Now, when you go back to the old maps, you'll see that almost every continent in the world is connected to the Arctic. The old maps that's shaped like a circle. In the center, you have the Arctic in the center, and at one end you have the Americas, and at the other end you'd have the Asian land masses, which they now broke up and called Middle East, North, South, East, North, South Africa, China, and India, and Europe. Okay. Now let's go back. Let's not settle too much on this right here. Let's go back. Let's go back. Okay. So where were we? Yes, here. The word originated in the 17th century India subcontinent and meant day laborer. But since the 20th century, the word was used in Raj, British Raj India to refer to porters and railway stations. Coolie is now regarded as derogatory and or a racial slur in the Americas, more so Caribbean, Oceania, and Africa, Southeast Asia. In reference to other people from Asia, the term differs from the word Dogla, which refers to people of mixed African and Indian ancestry. Coolie is instead used to refer to people of full blooded Indian descent whose ancestors migrated to the British former colonies of Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. This is particularly so in South Africa. What's that singer name? That female name that sing that song "Make Me Sweat" or whatever it's called. I don't remember her name. But when you look at her, you could definitely tell that she is a Coolie of Coolie descent, not South African. Coolie descent. Okay. Okay. Now, so where are we? Yeah. So particularly so in South Africa, the Eastern African countries, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, Jamaica, other parts of the Caribbean, Mauritius, Fiji, and the Malay Peninsula. In modern Indian popular culture, coolies have often been portrayed as working class heroes or anti heroes. Indian films celebrating coolies include The War in 1975, Coolie 1983, and several films titled Coolie Number One, released in 1991, 1995, and 2020. This we're going to come back to one of these options here. I'm gonna read more, and I'm gonna come back here to where it says debates over coolie labor. We're gonna go into that soon. History of coolie trade. Telling you people. Let me turn this thing down here. Give me 1 second. It should stop in a few. The background noise. That's the my heater. All right. But forgive me, forgive me. Let's continue on. Let's continue on. See, we can't just look into histories only in the Americas alone. We have to go other places to look into their history because their history connects to our history. You understand? So let's keep going. History of the coolie trade, end of African slavery, and beginning of the coolie trade. See, when we read these things, we have to make sense out of nonsense. You understand about the whole slave trade thing and see what's myth and what wasn't. The importation of Asian migrant laborers into European colonies was not new, occurring as early as the 17th century. However, in the 19th century, a far more robust system of the coolie trade emerged in direct response to the end of the African slave trade and the end of slavery as the preferred mode of labor in many plantations across European colonies. The British were the first to experiment with coolie labor as early as 1806. 200 Chinese were sent to the colony of Trinidad the very next year. In 1807, Britain outlawed the African slave trade with the Slave Trade Act of 1807. The Trinidad experiment was not a success with only 20 to 30 of the original laborers staying into the 1820s. Now remember, going from this point on, going into 1845 is where they really push a mass migration of coolie laborers throughout the Americas and the Caribbean. Millions of them. This is your transatlantic slave trade. Millions of them. And I don't want to jump the gun here so that folks can start putting the puzzle pieces together. These are your Africans. This is your African slave trade right here. No folks who are labeled as African American was taken. Your ancestors were not taken from Africa. They came here and already saw you here. And they were using these folks to push you out to replace you from here. This is the warfare for land that's always been going on. Okay? This is why it was important for them to re-educate you on your identity. And any leader that you had that came up that started waking up to truth, they got rid of them. But I digress. Let's keep going. The Trinidad experiment was not a success, with only 20 to 30 of the original laborers staying into the 1820s. However, such initial efforts inspired Sir John Gladstone, one of the earliest proponents of coolie labor, to seek out coolies for his sugar plantations in British Guyana, in hopes of replacing the African labor force after the abolition of slavery in Britain in 1833. Social and political pressure led to the abolition of the slave trade throughout the British Empire in 1833, with other European nations following suit. Labor intensive industries in the colonies, such as cotton and sugar plantations, mines, and railway construction, were left without a free source of manpower. As a consequence, a large scale trade in Asian, primarily Indian and Chinese, indentured laborers began in the 1820s to fill the vacuum. Now, we know this goes back beyond that. Because don't forget the Cromwell Wars when they said that Cromwell was evicting the Irish out of Ireland and Scotland. Okay, and those folks that was being evicted, so they say in the history that Cromwell is evicting all these folks, all these people, and they were shipping them over here into the Americas. They were shipping them as indentured laborers, and this is going back to the 16th, 1700s, probably even before that, probably a little before that. So indentured servitude is nothing new. And indentured servitude is called slave labor. And a slave was originally just a worker either who owed money, a worker who um were who did harm to someone else and was sentenced to indentured servitude to that person's family. These things. Or someone that just came and took over your land and was taxing you, you couldn't pay the taxes, so they put you on the indentured servitude, which came with a contract. Okay? And that part right there is important with the contract. All right? So if everyone can still hear me in the chat, just press 1 for me to let me know that you guys are still hearing me, that you guys are still here. All right, cool. Okay, so where were we? All right, so let me come back to here. However, such initial efforts inspired Sir John Gladstone, one of the earliest proponents of coolie labor, to seek out coolies for his sugar plantations in British Guyana in hopes of replacing the African labor force after the abolition of slavery in Britain in 1833. Social and political pressure led to the abolition of the slave trade throughout the British Empire in 1833, with other European nations following suit. Labor intensive industries in the colonies, such as cotton and sugar plantations, mines, and railway construction, were left without a free source of manpower. As a consequence, a large scale trade in Asian, primarily Indian and Chinese, indentured laborers began in the 1820s to fill this vacuum. In 1838, 396 South Asian workers arrived in British Guyana, and such a stream of migrant labor would continue until the First World War. Other nations, especially imperial powers such as France, Spain, and Portugal, these places are important because when you go back through um, history here, going back down to Columbus, all these places are mentioned, and it is important because these countries here played significant roles in the replacing of our population and the gentrification of our lands. They were all treated with each other to do so, to try to push out the Indians. So, anyway, let's keep going. France, Spain, and Portugal soon followed suit, especially as Britain, through several treaties such as Anglo-Portuguese Treaty of 1810 and the 1814 Treaty of Paris. That treaty is very important. Also pressured other nations to abolish the African slave trade in places such as the British Empire. The importation of Asian migrant laborers began in earnest after the abolition of slavery. In places such as Cuba, however, African slavery would not end until 1886, about 40 years after coolies were introduced. To show you the lies. Now, they would have no need for this so-called African slavery in the Americas if they had, by this time, hundreds of thousands of these indentured servants that came here by the name of coolies, which are the Asian people. Right? The Asiatic man is the coolie. Okay. Now let's go back up here to this, and then we'll come back down through the rest of this down here. Let's come back up here to this. So that was going to come to this. The debates. Debates over coolie labor as a form of slavery or free labor. Right? Given the close association of the beginning of coolie labor with African slavery, many contemporaries, including plantation owners, abolitionists, and government officials, struggled over whether coolie labor was just yet another form of slavery or a form of free labor. Pay attention. So why would you need African slaves if you was already using these people for free labor? Because they were. Proponents of coolie labor as free labor often pointed out the existence of a labor contract. Now, this part right here is very important. Okay? Of a labor contract between coolie and the employer. The contract would define the obligations of both parties. In Cuba, for example, all coolies were issued a contract before leaving for Cuba. The contract would be printed in both Chinese and Spanish and legalized by government officials. The contract would include details such as the name, age, and home village of the coolie, and usually guaranteed in return for 8 years of servitude, a pay of 1 peso a week, as well as some specified amount of rice, meat, fish, vegetables, and some clothes. Pay attention, this right here is so important. We're going to show the similarities in certain things. It also provided for some days off, as well as medical attention. The state also regulated the various stages of recruitment, transportation, and employment. This is how Chinatown was built and all the other places around Chinatown. Okay? And employment. Coolie labor, unlike slavery, was under contract, consensual, paid, and temporary, with the coolie to regain complete, pay attention, watch this, was under contract, paid, and temporary, with the coolie to regain complete freedom after their term of service. God damn it. Now, even in some of these slave movies that they show here in the Americas, if you pay attention, don't the slave master at times offer that the slave could buy his freedom for him and his wife? Don't the slave masters also paid their slaves coinage? They paid them. They paid these so-called African slaves here in the Americas. They paid them. This is facts. But look at it, try to sugarcoat this shit here, where they say again that it's temporary, so that they until they can earn their freedom. They were slaves, plain and simple. So we would have to go now into the definition of indentured servitude. Give me 1 second here, people. 1 second. 1 second, folks. We'll get back to the screen share there in a minute. In a minute. Let's go into, let me try to pull this up real quick. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see. Uh, 1 second, folks. I'm going to pull up the definition for indentured servitude. All right. So what we're going to do here. Let's see if it comes up. Now let me hit the screen share on. Let me just read it off. Let me hit the screen share on this. Give me 1 second, family. 1 second. All right, so here we go here. When you Google or Bing or whatever the definition of indentured servitude is a form of labor in which a person is contracted to work without salary for a specific number of years. That's slavery to me. And in the article that I was reading, did they not say indentured servitude? Indentured servitude, free labor. So why again would they need to have taken all these supposed Africans, millions, over from Africa to bring all the way here in the Americas on the slave trade forcibly when they was just giving these folks contracts to come work for free anyway by the millions? By the millions. So much so now, every state you go in, they all have their own communities. They all have their own communities. They own schools, have strong political ties in politics, strong ties in the police force. Majority of them are doctors, your cab drivers, restaurant owners, real estate owners. Pay attention now. Pay attention now. And indentured servitude. It's free labor. Indentured servitude is a form of labor in which a person is contracted to work without salary for a specific number of years. The contract, called an indenture, may be entered voluntarily for purported eventual compensation or debt repayment. Remember I just said that? People that owe someone something and you can't pay it back, so you got to go into servitude. And if you can't do it, they'll take your firstborn, which is the oldest, and put them to work. This is where the saying of the firstborn comes in also at. Repayment. Or it may be imposed involuntarily as a judicial, and I say that too, as a judicial punishment. Indentured servitude is a historical term associated with labor systems, particularly during the 17th and 18th centuries. An indentured servant would sign a contract or indenture agreeing to work for a specific time period in exchange for something valuable, often passage to a new country, or training in a trade. It was no need for them to go slaughter millions of Africans and bring them over into the Americas as slaves to force them to work in chains. There was no need for it. They already had these people lined up by the boatload. And another thing, but what was going on here in the Americas when folks were locked into indentured servitude contracts and couldn't get out of it? They couldn't get out of it because a lot of them couldn't read the language. It's not that they were illiterate, it's just that they didn't know how to translate this language that is now called the English tongue, or the Queen's language, or the King's language. They didn't know this language. They spoke a different dialect. So if you speak a different dialect, you can't read it. So if you can't read it, you can't get out of it when it's your time to get out of it. That means you don't know the verbiage in the contract, the legalese part of the contract, which were drafted up by mostly lawyers. Okay. Yes, sir. Indentured servitude, a historical term associated with labor systems, particularly during the 17th and 18th centuries. An indentured servant would sign a contract of indenture agreeing to work for a specific time period in exchange for something valuable. What was the something valuable that they came over here to work for the specific time? Hmm? These are the ones that didn't owe anything. Land. So when the Coolies came in Jamaica in 1845, they were each given about 5 acres of land. Land that was given to them by people whose land it was not for them to give. Lands here on the mainland by people whose lands it was not here for them to give. So what had happened for these folks to come here? Let's take Seneca Village, for example, which is the entire island of Manhattan. The Seneca Indians. They slaughtered them, buried them, slaughtered them, and buried them in Manhattan on what is now called Wall Street and all these different other major landmarks in New York. Dug them back up a few years ago and labeled them as the African burial ground. These are the Seneca Indians that they relabeled as the African burial grounds. What happened to their cities? They buried them or turned them into subway systems. This is why when you go into New York and you see certain manholes and stuff, when you go down in them, you go down in those manholes or those craters, you go down in them and you're seeing a whole underground city, buildings that's graffitied up from the early 70s in the early from the 70s to the 80s. Like old school graffiti artists, they know what this is. They know these spots. They're still there. They build roads over them, streets over them. They're there. Okay. History, folks. History. Let's go back to the other topic at hand. Let's go back. We're connecting dots. I want everyone to do their own research. Okay? I want everyone to do their own research. Like this is deep. This goes back to Yaqub and the children of Yaqub. But we're not going to stray. We're not going to go too much we're not going to go too much into that. Right? Those are things for another time. Let's get back to the other topic. All right. Let's pull the next one back up. Let's pull it back up. Let's come back to here. So where were we? Okay. This is where we was at. Yep, this is where we was at. Now we're here into the payments. Let's see. The contract. Here, I'm gonna start back from right here. If y'all can see. The contract would include details such as the name, age, and home village of the coolie, and usually guaranteed in return for 8 years of servitude, a pay of 1 peso a week, as well as some specified amount of rice, meat, or the various stages of recruitment, transportation, and employment. Coolie labor, unlike slavery, was under contract, consensual paid, and temporary, with the coolie to regain complete freedom after their term of service. You see, this is why it's important to look up the definitions of words. This is why I looked up indentured servitude, because the other article mentions indentured servitude. You see, in this portion here, it tries to make it seem like these people just volunteered just so go do this thing, just so, you know what I mean? And that's not the case. That's not the case in all of in this entire story. It's a case in some, but not it's not the case in all. Okay. All right. The various stages of recruitment, transportation, and employment. Coolie labor, unlike slavery, was under contract. Now it's important because they said unlike slavery, right? Let's give me 1 second here now. 1 second. 1 second, folks. 1 second. Where are we? 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 Here we are. 1 second. Let me pull this up here. An article, a very interesting article that I came across. All right. Here we go. This article here. Were enslaved people in America ever paid for their work? Were enslaved people in America? And look at the pictures, the drawings of who they show are the enslaved. These are the Indians, who they relabel as African, African American, Black, Colored, Negro. But when you go back to the old maps of the 13, 14, 15, 16, 1700s, you'll see these same images of these people that they're calling the Americans on those maps. That's why I used to tell you guys, save these maps, save these things. It is important that you save them. It's important that you download the streams that I do, because they might get rid of them. And you said that they got rid of, I think, over 1,000 videos of mine. Right? And the first channel, totally gone. All right, so let's go to this here. Were enslaved people in America ever paid for their work? If so, how were they differentiated from employees? Dan Cosson's answers. Let's see. Published April 2011. This was published in 2011. This is how old this article is. Okay? That's how old this article is. All right, give me 1 second here. Generally speaking, slaves enjoyed few material benefits beyond crude lodgings, basic foods, and cotton clothing. Still, some plantation slaves were able. Give me 1 second, folks. 1 second. I gotta take this real quick. My grand uncle's asking me to send him the link to the live. And a friend of mine's also. 1 second. Let me send it to them. Okay, here we go. Generally speaking, slaves enjoyed few material benefits beyond crude lodgings, basic foods, and cotton clothing. Still, some plantation slaves were able to earn small amount of cash by telling fortunes or playing the fiddle at dances. Others sold poultry, meat, and liquor or peddled handcrafts. In some cases, slaves could earn money from their master if they performed tasks with particular skills. Now, an enslaved person, to show you, now we have to pay attention here. We have to know what we're speaking on when we're breaking these things down. Because enslavement means one without any form of will, choice of anything. Okay, meaning that everything comes from the person who has enslaved you. That means I'm not allowing you to go. If you're selling food, goods, that means you're not on the plantation selling these goods. You're off the plantation selling these goods. So now, if you're enslaved, how does an enslaved person go off the plantation to go sell goods? Hmm? And how does the one with talent, skills, that knows masonry work, are the ones paid by the slave master? If I'm the slave master, I'll just beat the crap out of you and force you to do what's needed to be done. Why would I pay you? Reason being is because they were all on the contract, except for the ones that were prisoners of war. Those are the ones who were in jail. Call it jail. But the ones who were not prisoners of war were on the contract, indentured servants. This is really killing that transatlantic slave trade story. Anyway, I digress. Let's go. Let's start it back. Generally speaking, slaves enjoyed few material benefits beyond crude lodgings, basic foods, and cotton clothing. Still, some plantation slaves were able to earn small amounts of cash by telling fortunes or playing the fiddle at dances. Others sold poultry, meat, and liquor or peddled handicrafts. In some cases, slaves could earn money from their master if they performed tasks with particular skill. The master, for their part, saw small cash incentives as a way to encourage productive work habits in the towns. cities, and manufacturing areas of the Upper South. Slaves were able to earn money thanks to another way to manage labor, the hiring out system. Contracts deferred in terms of food, conditions, and treatment. Contracts. Contracts. This is the same as the coolie contracts that we were breaking down in the other article. The same. Contracts deferred in terms of food, conditions, and treatment, but most slaves hired out to work for others could expect to earn wages working beyond what was considered a working day. In the tobacco factories of Richmond, Virginia, for example, they would complete their daily quota of work and receive bonus pay for anything after that. Some were also allowed to hire themselves out, brokering their own deals. They paid their masters a monthly fee and kept anything they earned above the amount. Wages varied across time and place, but self hire slaves could command between 100 a year for unskilled labor in the early 19th century to as much as $500 for skilled work in the lower South in the late 1850s. Skilled cabinet workers and joiners could sometimes earn as much as white workers. A select few could even afford to buy themselves out of bondage. I think that was it. Yep, there we go. Now, like I said, if you go back and you watch some of these slave movies, they'll show the slave master offering the slave, "Hey, well, if you could come up with this amount of money, you could buy your freedom and buy your wife's freedom." You hear them say that in plenty of these movies. In plenty of these movies, they'll say that in these movies. They'll give them an offer to buy their freedom, to get their freedom papers. Now, what a freedom paper is a paper releasing them from their servitude, their service of indentured servitude, whether it was consensual or unconsensual, whether it was by the courts or you just going up and saying, "Hey, I want to work for you for this, and that. Hey, I hear that you guys are given free land in the new world. I would like to get free land in the new world. So, how could I get that?" I'm telling y'all, this man. Let's go back to the other article. Back to the other article. Let's get back. Okay. Now we're back to here now. So the contract would include details as the name, age, and home village of the coolie, and usually guaranteed in return for 8 years of servitude. Yes, it went to 8 to 12 years. That's like the movie 12 Years a Slave, right? Anywhere from 8 to 12 years of 8 years of servitude, a pay of 1 peso a week, as well as some specified amount of rice, meat, fish, vegetables, and some clothes. This is very similar to what I just read for the enslaved people, right? It also provide for some days off, as well as medical attention. The state also regulated the various stages of recruitment, transportation, and employment. Coolie labor, unlike slavery, but it was slavery, was under contract. Slavery was also under contract. We just covered a portion of that. Consensual, paid, and temporary, or also free labor with the means of gaining something great in return, which was the land. With the coolie to regain complete freedom after their term of service. So they were slaves. Regulations were put in place as early as 1837. Now that's important because coolie labor, or the Hindus, or they say that they don't like to be called Hindus. Anyway, that form of coolie labor of the folks who are from India, they came into the Caribbean in 1845, right? 1845 was when they came into the Jamaica, and I believe also Trinidad. They were being shipped all throughout the Caribbean in 1845. These regulations were put in place as early as 1837 by the British authorities in India to safeguard these principles of voluntary, contractual work and safe and sanitary transportation. The Chinese government also made efforts to secure the well-being of their nation's workers. So if folks aren't getting it by now, also the Chinese men and women were also identified as coolie. Okay? And it's not just any Chinese men and women. It's the ones that they call the black Chinese men and women. Because the term coolie is also stuck to us. It's a stigma. It's also stuck to a certain ethnical background looking type of people. And those are the darker you people. Okay? The Chinese government, this is why I was saying that China was spending a lot of years trying to kick out as much of their dark-skinned brethren out of China as possible. And on these reservations of the folks who we now call today Native Americans, they are the children of those coolies, the dark-skinned Indians, and the dark-skinned Chinese, and even your Spaniards that came over. And this is where your native, your reservation Indians come from, and your Middle Eastern Asians. This is why when they check the DNA of a lot of the folks on the reservations, it traces back to the Middle East. Okay, they're Asians. And this is why you have the Indian on the reservation and you have the Indian off of the reservation. This is why the former Lenape chief during I believe it was a BBC documentary, or I think it was C-SPAN, and they took the footage down. They took the video down that I put up. He said one night they went to sleep black, and the next day they woke up white. Okay, let's keep going. Uh, Consensual paid. With the coolie to regain complete freedom after their term of service. Regulations were put in place as early as 1837 by the British authorities in India to safeguard these principles of voluntary, contractual work and safe and sanitary transportation. The Chinese government also made efforts to secure the well-being of their nation's workers. This is watch. With representations being made to relevant governments around the world. Some anti-slavery activists saw coolie labor as paving the way towards abolition, to gradually and peacefully replace African slave labor without loss of profit. But they weren't replacing African slave labor because they are the Africans. They are the Asian folks who are now identified as Africans, and then over time they split it up and started calling these folks here. This is your Chinese here, or these are your Indians here, your Hindus here, and over here these are your Middle Easterns here, and here goes your Europeans here. And that whole continent, that whole land, was once called Asia. All of it. So all of these folks, they are cousins. Those are blood relatives. And remember, the oldest definition of Caucasian goes back to a Negro face. This is important because the very first invaders of the Americas were dark-skinned people. Okay? All right. The Chinese government also made efforts to secure the well-being of their nation's workers, with representations being made to relevant governments around the world. Some anti-slavery activists saw coolie labor as paving the way towards abolition, to gradually and peacefully replace African slave labor without loss of profit. In practice, however, as many opponents of coolie labor argued, abuse and violence was rampant. They generally signed on for a period of 2 to 5 years, in addition to having their passage paid for. Coolies were also paid under 20 cents per day. On average, however, over $1 would be taken from them every month in order to pay off their debts. Why? Because they're indentured servants. And most indentured servants were those who went in it owing a debt to be paid. This indentureship was a way for Europeans to create the illusion of free labor while still keeping the benefits of slavery. Now, that's like you, the everyday man. You go to work, and what do? They tax your shit. State, federal, right? Social Security. All these taxes come out of your check. Who's taxing you? The IRS. Who's the IRS under? The Treasury. Who's the Treasury? Who runs the Treasury? It's not the government, because even the government has to borrow money from the Treasury. And when the government borrows money from the Treasury, they too are taxed. So who's taxing the government, which is taxing you? Who's doing that? This is taxation. Business, people, business. In practice, however, many opponents of coolie labor argued abuse, violence was rampant. They generally signed on for a period of 2 to 5 years, in addition to having their passage paid for. Coolies were also paid under 20 cents per day on average. However, over $1 would be taken from them every month in order to pay off their debts. This indentureship was a way for Europeans to create the illusion of free labor while still keeping the benefits of slavery. The coolie trade was often compared to the early slave trade, and they accomplished very similar things. Similar to slave plantations, one Caribbean estate could have over 600 coolies, with Indians making up over half. Also, similarly to slave plantations, there were preconceived notions of how often ethnicities worked. In his paper, Eastern Coolie Labor, W.L. Distant recalled his time on an estate, observing the work ethic and behaviors of coolies. Just as many believe that Africans had an affinity for hard outdoor labor, Distant believed that Indian, Chinese, and Japanese coolies were different in their ability to perform certain jobs. Indian coolies were viewed as lower in status. And that's how this is why Asian people this is why Asian folks they beef with each other. They argue, they fight with each other, and they're very racist towards each other. I was working on a job where the Chinese and the Filipinos went at it constantly. Where the Mexicans, not the Mexicans, because a Mexican and a Mexican is not the same. Anyway, where the Mexicans, which are also Asian folks, and the Filipinos and the Chinese, all three, they were beefing, hardcore beefing. And we that they were called a black person, we were just sitting back amazed, like, look at this shit. Look at this. Man, where were we? Had an affinity for hard labor, hard outdoor labor. Distant believed that Indian, Chinese, and Japanese coolies were different in their ability to perform certain jobs. Now, before I continue on, pay attention to Hawaii. It's the Japanese that they use to replace the majority of the population of the original Hawaiians. You understand? And even bred them out, diluted the bloodline. Okay? Now, let's go back. Just as many believe that Africans had an affinity for hard outdoor labor, Distant believed that the Indian, Chinese, and Japanese coolies were different in their ability to perform certain jobs. Indian coolies were viewed as lower in status. Those who ran estates believed that Chinese and Japanese coolies were hard working, united, and clean. Indian coolies, on the other hand, were viewed as dirty and were treated as children who required constant supervision. No lies, it's man, them YouTube videos of how y'all cook y'all food is not working for y'all. You know, hand and foot be all up on the counter and all that shit. Yeah. Anyway, coolies were harder working, united. Chinese and Japanese coolies were harder working and united, right? And clean. Indian coolies, on the other hand, were viewed as dirty and were treated as children who required constant supervision. Also, similar to slavery, coolie labor servitude coolie labor served British interests by upholding their political economy. Since slave trade was illegal, the British Borghese needed another group to perform the manual labor for the lucrative plantations. Abolitionists in Britain and US, such as the British Anti-Slavery Society and British and Foreign Anti-Slavery Society, and American abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison were highly critical of coolie labor as being no better than slavery. Pro slavery advocates, particularly in the American South, condemned coolie labor, but used it to argue against the abolition of black slavery, claiming the latter was more humane than the former. Woo! Come on now. Come on now. From British colonies, Chinese coolies from British colonies. Workers from China were mainly transported to work in pay attention. This is important because remember when it's not just the ICCC, Lacono, Kappa, even Brother Curry Mayo, my platform, American Arawak, like a few of us used to break down the history of Peru, right? And what the original indigenous people of Peru looked like to what they now look like today, to where it shows you how they imported folks up into Peru after slaughtering millions of the original Peruvians. And the ones that they couldn't slaughter through gunfire, they gave diseases, sickness. The ones that didn't die off through diseases and sickness because the numbers were lowered, they imported other ethnicity from other parts of the world and started breeding them out. Okay? Which comes to this rare. Workers from China were mainly transported to work in Peru and Cuba. This is why everywhere you go, you see these folks have these Asian features. In Peru and Cuba. And I'm not going to sit here and say that this has not carried over into some of our family lineage. It possibly might have, right? My thing about history is let's tell history as truthful as possible as the information reveals. You understand? What were the identity of the people here? Who were they? Who were the original Indians of the Americas? Let's not take away from the ancestors that originally originated here and give to what they've built, to what they've cultivated before we even existed, to someone else that literally just came with the intention, with their government literally sent them here with the intention to colonize and steal the land and the culture of the folks who were already here and their identity. Let's be truthful. You see what I'm saying? This is the only way healing could even start to healing could start. True healing could start in the world if truth is told. You see what I'm saying? Let's go. Workers from China were mainly transported to Peru and Cuba. However, many Chinese laborers worked in British colonies such as Singapore. Pay attention now. Pay attention. Such as Singapore, New South Wales, Jamaica, British Guyana, now called Guyana, British Malaya, Trinidad and Tobago, British Honduras, now Belize, as well. And it's important that we look up the old maps of also Honduras as well. All right, because my ancestry goes into Honduras. It is important that we know what these places were before names were even changed. So if you're stuck at one level, there's possibly that the name of the area was changed to what you see now today. And then you find the name before that, then the name before that, because every colonial entity that came here had a name for each landmass or a different spelling of the name. All right. British Honduras now believes, as well as in the Dutch colonies within the Dutch East Indies and Suriname. The first shipment of Chinese laborers was to the British colony of Trinidad in 1806 in an attempt to establish a settlement of free peasant cultivators and laborers. Now, this is important, right? Because it says the first laborers, the first shipment of Chinese laborers. But historically, we go back to before Columbus. The first set of people to come into the Americas to see the Indians were Asian folks. You understand? And that were the Chinese and the Mongols and the Chinese. Vasco da Gama, the man who Columbus idolized and took his teachings to navigate the world or to navigate the earth, learned how to sail the seas from Asian folks. Understand this. And this is going back before the 17th, before the 18th, before the 17th, before the 16th, before the 15th, the 14th. This is going back to the 12 and the 1300s. This is when these folks were traveling freely upon the waters to come to the Americas to get seeds to take back to their homeland to grow food, to come get our tobacco, our spices, our herb, our marijuana, to take back and take home, our soursop, our cassava, these things to take back and take home. And when they were leaving, they took some of our animals also with them. This is where they came to learn how to cultivate harsh lands. Because here in the Americas during that time, if you go back and you study the history of the God damn it, the Romans, if you go back and you study the what was his name? Oh, I got a brain block. I got a blockage. Yes, also cocoa. Cocoa is also what they took back over to their homelands as well. The cocoa seeds, the seed pods, right? What was the other empire other than the Roman Empire? So when you have so much information in your head, sometimes it just creates a blockage. It just creates a blockage. Not Alexander. I forgot. I'll remember, but I'll bring it back up in probably in the second series of this, right? But you had great empires that was coming over into the Americas to learn from our libraries. And before they came to the mainland, they have to go through the Caribbeans. So they went through the Caribbeans and they stopped at the schooling of the Caribbeans, of the Caribbean islands. They learned there. Then they came here on the mainland and they learned here, right? And then they took their teachings and they went back over to their homeland. Okay? But all will reveal itself. All will be revealed. But this information here is it's a whopper. This gives more insight and understanding of what the slave trade really and truly was, right? And in later series, we're going to go and break down to show you how they've been tampering with the DNA, the genetics, right? Through Donna, oh, I forgot her last name, but her name was Donna. Forgot her last name. She was on TED Talks, right? See, so much information, and I did like 5 videos on the woman. But she's a scientist that deals with mRNA research, and her students, the research that they do is how to block out the gene that creates the dark pigmentation in skin, to make sure that even if the woman is of a melanated hue, a dark hue woman, that she's pushing out a Caucasian looking baby. This is why when you see now if you pay attention, because all over Netflix, all over, even in the commercials, it's always interracial. It's nothing wrong if that's how you do. It's free will. But I'm showing you a programming that's going on here. All over TV, even in commercials, it's interracial relationships that they're showing. Even in commercials, even if you're watching YouTube and a commercial pop up, it's a young Negro woman with an older Caucasian male or Asian male. You know what I mean? And then the baby that she has don't look nothing like her. This is all genetic manipulation. That now is going into what we call the Jack and Jill's Club, the Jack and Jill sorority. That's another deep topic right there. That's their thing. These females that they show, or these males that they show in these are in these societies. One of them is the biggest. It's called Jack and Jill. It's pretty much what they call a swirler society. Now again, I have my family's is a melting pot. So I'm not judging anyone. I'm just showing you the social engineering or the social programming that is going on to the young minds of our children today, to program them of who they should be with and who they should not be with. You understand? So when we speak of warfare, when we speak of colonization, it's on many fronts. It's not just economical. It's not just through genetics, but also physical warfare, social engineering. What your children here in the Americas watching TikTok, the children in China cannot never watch those. And they're allowed by Chinese law only 3 hours to play video games. 3 hours. Understand this. Anyway, let's go back to here. So we were here. The first shipment of Chinese laborers was to the British colony of Trinidad in 1806 in an attempt to establish a settlement of free peasant cultivators and laborers. Free. Now, this is why the Chinese sell everything at such a cheap price. Pay attention. The only reason why they will have to have these people come in and work for free and offer and give them land is because the folks that was here before them was getting paid. And they were getting paid too much. So they brought in other workers to replace the workers that was there before. This is why when the Chinese folks are colonizing the world, they start with the workforce. They come, they work on a deal with your government, they set up their factories, and they import all their workers, all their prisoners and workers from China come work in their factories. Okay? And then they sell back the goods to each other at a cheaper price than anybody else and sell it to you for more than what they sell it back to each other for. Okay? And then now if you're saying you're going to compete with them, then they're going to drop their prices to your customers to where you can't afford it because you got stuck in a society to where majority of your materials, you're importing it from another country, not knowing that the other country that you're importing these materials from was really taking it from your land and shipping it to their land and getting it built up, made up, cultivated up, and shipping it back to you and selling you back your own shit at a higher price. and then run the average businessman and woman out on their own land out of business and take over and set up shop. And then they bring in more of their people. And this is what they do. And next minute, you know, you have a Chinatown here and a Chinatown there and a little Italy here and a little Mexico here and a Mexican village here and so on and so on. This is what you have. Pay attention. All right. In attempts to establish a settlement of free peasant. Now, remember what I told you about what the Chinese, the pale Chinese, describe the dark Chinese as? They describe them as peasants. And they keep them locked away up in the countryside. They don't even come down into like Beijing or Hong Kong or none of them, whatever areas that they have. You know what I mean? The ones with the dreads and the locks and the ones with the afro type hair. This is their hair texture. And when they hot comb it or press it, it comes down straight like a Caucasian person's hair. These are their uncles, their granddaddies, their grandmothers, their great grandmothers that they hide away, like the Spanish folks do, when they hide away their darker counterparts in the closet when family picture time come around. A lot of them do that. That's why you hear George Lopez and them would say, well, my grandmother wouldn't want me to bring home a black woman. Or, you know what I mean? They'll tell you. Like their children and their grandchildren will tell you. They'll be honest with you and they'll tell you. Some of them anyway. They call them peasants. Then they say the reason why they got their dark skin complexions because they worked in the sun for so long at the rice farms. Bullshit. They were born with that melanin in them. The first shipment of Chinese laborers was to the British colony of Trinidad in 1806 in an attempt to establish a settlement of free peasant cultivators and laborers. On many of the voyages, the laborers were transported on the same vessels that had been used to transport African slaves in the previous years. That is such bullshit. It's to show you the transatlantic slave trade was the whole Ellis Island era where all these folks was coming through Ellis Island back in the 17 and the 1800s, right? Going back to even the 1600s. It was this. It has always been this. This is your slave trade. They came here by the millions. There's videos of these people on boats packed. They're packed on the boats till there's no room to even move. But there's no videos, there's no proof that they've ever smuggled in any Africans on the belly of boats here in such great numbers. There is none. There's only theories and opinions. And then people created fake sculptures of ship bellies with statues of people chained together that looks like us. And people say, see, it was real. No, a man literally just carved that shit. What are you talking about? It's not real. Now, here we go. The Coolie slave trade, run by American captains and local agents and mainly consisting of debt slavery. The Coolie slave trade, run by American captains and local agents and mainly consisting of debt slavery, was called the pig trade as the living conditions were not dissimilar to that of livestock. Now, when they say that these folks are getting sick on these ships and they had to throw them overboard in their chains and stuff, the ones who were in chains were the prisoners of war or the prisoners that they were kicking out of the country and sending them over here. Like right now, what's going on at the border, where it's a lot of prisoners that's being released from Mexican prisons and being shipped over here and being put into these migrant hotels. Donald Trump warned y'all. Honor, honor, Sister Cherokee. Honor, honor. Aboriginal Gem Finder. Honor, honor. Brother Nino Brown. Nino, honor, honor. I said Brown. Brother Nino, honor, honor. Um, yeah. So when they speaking of the harsh conditions of a livestock, this is it. When they saying that the people they stank so much and they were in their own feces and this type of this and they had to make a decision to throw some overboard. They're not going to throw the free ones overboard, the ones who weren't prisoners. You know what I mean? They threw the chained up ones overboard in the waters. Okay, so the coolie slave trade run by American captains and local agents and mainly consistent of debt slavery was called the pig trade as the living conditions were not dissimilar to that of livestock. On some vessels, as many as 40% of the coolies died en route. Look, I didn't even need to read the rest to let y'all know that. Died en route. As many as 500 were crammed into a single ship hold. Huh? Leaving no room to move. Some of these were Chinese women kidnapped to be slaves under the demand of American and Caribbean plantation owners. The recruited laborers were required to pay for their ship fares from meager earnings, which were frequently below living expenses, forcing them into virtual slavery. Because why? They couldn't afford the price of what they told them that they needed to pay. Now these were the voluntary ones. Okay. The coolies were also stamped on their backs like livestock. Foreign merchants took advantage of the unequal treaties negotiated between the Queen government and Western powers after the Opium Wars. Because remember, opium trade was a big trade, was a big thing going on, right? And the Asian population and their cousins, the Caucasian population, they were at war with each other over opium, which brings us now into this era when it comes to weed. They were going at it with us when it came to the weed trade because we controlled the weed trade. We who were these so-called African slaves, controlled the weed trade in the Americas. And what did they do? They came together, they plotted together, and they deemed marijuana to be illegal because these same foreign entities, these same coolie indentured servants and servants who were under servitude that rose up in political power and had their children or their biracial children that took hold in power signed off on these unlawful demands to make this thing illegal so that you couldn't pull in any form of income to compete with your colonial counterparts. And now that their children has gotten into it on a great deal, they legalized it so that their children can be legal millionaires and billionaires off of it. Understand this. They said drugs is illegal, coke is illegal, opium is illegal. But remember, the U.S. military is the ones that's overseeing the opium fields in Afghanistan and all over the other rest of parts of the world. So they're harvesting it and they're still selling it because they're still using it in modern day medicine today. It's just that you, the indigenous man and woman from your lands, you're not allowed to touch it to become wealthy, because if you're allowed to touch it to become wealthy, now you're building a strong household. Now I that call myself the superpower, I can't tear down your household and have you under my thumb. Okay? All right. It says as many as 500 were crammed into a single ship hold, leaving no room to move. Some of these were Chinese women kidnapped to be slaves under the demand of American and Caribbean plantation owners. The recruited laborers were required to pay for their ship fares from meager earnings, which were frequently below living expenses, forcing them into virtual slavery. The coolies were also stamped on their backs like livestock. Foreign merchants took advantage of the unequal treaties negotiated between the Qing government and Western powers after the Opium Wars, as well as the resulting political and economic instability. To broker deals for contracted workers, Portuguese Macau was the center of this trade. Coolie slavery were described as the only real business in Macau. From 1848 to 1873, generating numerous profits for the Portuguese until it was banned due to pressure from British government. Because now every time there's a war, there's a change in power dynamics. You understand? So a lot of these other countries that had power that was a part of this slave trade, they were losing power over the years through warfare, through economical warfare, certain type of dispositions. They were losing the footing. So when the European powers started rising up more and more in power, because they started using they militarized the Americas. That's why they said America is the spear and shield for Europe. America is Europe's war dog. America is the workhorse of the rest of the Europe for the rest of the European nations. You understand? This is why they get a 13th month and all this type of stuff, and up to almost a year off of maternity leave, and because it's American taxpayer dollars that covers their luxury. Anyway, so generating numerous profits for the Portuguese until it was banned due to pressure from the British government. In 1847, two ships from Cuba transported workers to Havana to work in the sugarcane fields from the port of Xiamen, one of the five Chinese treated ports opened to the British by the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. These are some treaties that y'all should look into. The trade soon spread to other ports in Guangdong, and demand became particularly strong in Peru. Back to Peru again. For workers in the silver mines and the guano collecting industry. Australia, we're going to get into the next one we're going to do is on Australia. Australia began importing workers in 1848, and the United States began using them in 1865 on the first transcontinental railroad construction. These workers were deceived about their terms of employment to a much greater extent than their Indian counterparts, and consequently, there was a much higher level of Chinese immigration during this period. Now they're saying that the Australian workers were deceived, right? But again, this is going to go back into the Darwinism theory of the closest relatives to monkeys. This is where all of this is going back into as well, right? But that's on the other episodes. The trade flourished from 1847 to 1854 without incident until reports began to surface of the mistreatment of the workers in Cuba and Peru. As the British government had political and legal responsibility for many of the ports involved, including Amoy. Such ports were immediately closed. Despite these closures, the trade simply shifted to the more accommodating port within the Portuguese enclave of Macau. That's what you call sanctions. Closing the ports. That's sanctions. Many coolies were first deceived or kidnapped and then kept in barracoons and detention centers, or loading vessels in the ports of departure, as were African slaves. Come on, the that whole region. That is Africa. It was once called Asia. Now the whole thing is Africa. They can try to separate it 10 million times as much as they want. You know what I mean? All of this is as were African slaves. This part is bullshit. It's bullshit. When they say African slaves, they're trying to have you picture you yourself, what you look like, your features. But it's bullshit. It's bullshit. This voyage are their voyages, which are sometimes called the Pacific Passage, were as inhumane and dangerous as the notorious Middle Passage of the Atlantic slave trade. It is the Atlantic slave trade. Mortality was very high. It is estimated that from 1847 to 1859, but mind you, the coolies in Jamaica came in 1845. That's what is documented. 1845 is when they mass migrated into the Caribbean. You understand? But anyway, I digress. Estimated from 1847 to 1859, the average mortality rate for coolies aboard ships to Cuba was 15.2%, and losses among those aboard ships to Peru were as high as 40% in the 1850s and 30.44% from 1860 to 1863. I'm telling you, this is your transatlantic slave trade. This is it. They were sold and were taken to work in plantations or mines with very bad living and working conditions. The duration of a contract was typically 5 to 8 years, but many coolies did not live out their term of service due to hard labor and mistreatment. Survivors were often forced to remain in servitude beyond the contracted period. The coolies who worked on the sugar plantations in Cuba and in the guano beds of the Chinca Islands, the islands of hell of Peru, were treated brutally. 75% of the Chinese coolies in Cuba died before fulfilling their contracts. More than two-thirds of these Chinese coolies who arrived in Peru between 1849 and 1874 died within the contract period. In 1860, it was calculated that of the 4,000 coolies brought to the Chincas since the trade began, not one had survived. This is your transatlantic slave trade. You understand me? This is where all the bodies come from. Because of these unbearable conditions, Chinese coolies often revolted against their Ko Hong bosses. Now, this is important because the folks that were selling them and locking them into slavery servitude was their own people. These were the mafia, the mafia people of those times, the gangsters or the high political figures of those times that was doing that. That was saying, nah, F them, let them work beyond their contract. You know what I mean? This is their people when they were selling them into slavery, into servitude. This is what they was telling the folks who bought them. You see what I'm saying? And in return, what they did, they have their treaties going, and this is why Chinatown and all these other areas still to this very day is mob controlled. They're mob controlled. You understand? So this is a bloodline thing. Because of these unbearable conditions, Chinese coolies often revolted against their Ko-Hong bosses and foreign company bosses at ports of departure, on ships, and in foreign lands. The coolies were put in the same neighborhoods. Now, pay attention. I want you to pay attention. You have the Indians on the reservation, right? And then you have the Indians off the reservation, which are the true Indians. So we are the Indians off the reservations. And they locked us in what is now called slums, hoods, projects. And when every time they have a mass migration of migrants from the Middle East and the Asians that are coming in by the millions across the borders into from Mexico, where do they put them? They put them into our communities because we are the last descendants, the strong that still has strong amounts of the bloodline of the original indigenous Indians of the Americas. So they need to breed us out. They need to get us to mix more. Because the more and more we intermix with them, the more and more we give them eminent domain through blood lineage, through bloodline. And it's law. You understand? Now watch. So the hung bosses and foreign company bosses at ports and departure, on ships and in foreign lands. The coolies were put in the same neighborhoods as Africans, and since most were unable to return to their homeland or have their wives come to the new world, because when they came, it's mostly men that came. If you're coming to work and to go back home, or you're coming to set up for a family life, you're going to bring your wife. They didn't bring their wives with them. It's men that came because it's colonization, it's war. It's a different form of war, right? Now, remember at the time, during these times, they were slaughtering a lot of our great great grandfathers, great great granduncles. They were killing off a lot of the males in our communities and locking them up, like you see now today, where majority of our men are our brothers are in prison right now. There's more of us in prison than there are of us on the streets. Watch this. Put in the same neighborhoods as Africans. And since most were unable to return to their homeland or have their wives come to the new world, many married African women. But I tell you, but these aren't African women. These are the Indians off the reservation that they're mislabeling as African. The coolies' interracial relationships and marriages with Africans, Europeans, and indigenous peoples. This is where they add us in now. But the indigenous peoples, the people who they're calling Africans, are the indigenous people, which are the true Indians, right? Formed some of the modern world's Afro-Asian and Asian Latin American populations. Boom goes the dynamite. I tell y'all, you just have to keep ignoring the word African, because Africa or African is another term used loosely as more is used. You understand? You have to know the origination of these words and why these words were created and how they use these words to mislead you. Because Africa is a corporate construct, has nothing to do with that landmass. This is why a Igbo or Zulu call itself Zulu, they call itself Igbo, they call itself Swahili, they call itself Ashanti, whatever it is, the name of their tribe is, that's what they call themselves. They don't say, "Well, yes, I'm African, I'm a black African." No, they try identify with nationality. You understand? So when the term Africa was created, it was like the term more. It was literally just saying dark skinned people all over the world. That's literally what we're saying. And then you had some folks that had a smart idea. Well, we're going to take the word more and we're going to turn it into an occultic type of thing and say, well, the Moorish Science Temple of America and the Moorish Science Temple, and we are Muslims, not Muslims, but we're Muslims. You understand? And they created a society no different from Scientology. So now when they use the word and you as like if you're a person like me, you're thinking, well, you're just saying dark skinned person. But no, they're talking about the occultic society. That's the same thing with the term African. You understand? And this is where the confusion comes in. This is where the psychological warfare comes in. The social construct or the social engineering comes in of the mindset. Now, so it says now the Coolies interracial relationships, because the reason why they needed for the men to to marry our females is because through some of our cultures, the land and the inheritance was passed down through the woman. Understand? The land, because it goes back to the man plants the seed in the woman gives birth to the child. You understand? So the next generation, she has to bring forth the next generation, even though we are planting the seed in her. She has to bring forth the next generation. So this also goes back into why in a lot of our cultures, the land or inheritance of land went through the woman. This is why they imported nothing but men here while they hung our brothers, our uncles, our fathers, our grandfathers, our sons on trees. And there's another reason to why the hanging of us on trees, because that goes back to Yeshua, that goes back to the Christ concept of hanging on the holly tree, which is the ingredient, one of the key ingredients to creating holy water, along with the myrrh. Understand? Along with the myrrh and the oil, the olive oil. So, yeah, Jesus was not crucified on the cross; he was hung from a tree. Anyway, so yes, so the Coolies' interracial relationships and marriages with Africans, European, and indigenous people formed some of the modern world's Afro-Asian and Asian Latin American culture populations. But this mixture already was here because again, the Mongols and the Chinese were some of the first to come to the Americas. Some went home, some did not. We did business with these folks. We adopted some of them into our tribes, into our culture. You understand? In Spanish in Spanish colonies, colonos was the four coolies. Was the four coolies in in Spanish colonos was the four coolies. Okay, I don't. The Spanish colony of Cuba feared slavery uprising, such as those that took place in Haiti, and used coolies as a transition between slaves and free labor. That's because the indigenous people on the land, the Arawak Indians, who they now wrongfully call Afro Caribbean and black and descendants of Africans, they still held mass numbers in the Caribbean. See, they pushed us out of the mainland from the south and from Mexico, and they pushed us down from Texas and these places, and we used the Caribbean as our last strongholds of refuge. So we had great numbers. So When we formulated contracts with these people and they were violating their contracts, we rebelled on them and kicked their asses every time. This is why if you research the history of Jamaica, you'll see that there's at least 3 times where they kicked Chinese businessmen and women out of off the island through physical warfare. They slaughtered them because of the mistreatment, the same mistreatment that we see now going on today. But the thing is, today's society of young people today, a lot of them are degenerates, and they are more focused on slaughtering themselves than coming together to see what's going on in their homeland and where the root of the problem lies in their political governments. I'm not advocating for violence towards anyone, but hey, um, so yeah, the Spanish colony of Cuba feared slavery uprisings as those that took place in Haiti and used coolies as a transition between slaves and free labor. They were neither free nor slaves. They were neither free nor slaves. Indentured Chinese servants also labored in the sugarcane fields of Cuba well after the 1884 abolition of slavery in the country. Now, why did they go and have to get a mass number of coolies? Because coolies mean dark skinned people also. You understand? More means dark skinned people all over the world. Coolies, you see, they say you have your coolie Indian, your coolie Chinese, your coolie Spaniard. It means the same thing. Now, why did they have to go get these people? Because at the time they also had Caucasian slaves here. The Caucasian in the term of what we know it as today as pale skinned folks here in the Americas. And they couldn't last in the sun. And since the indigenous folks on the lands rebelled, right, and it was an uproar of protest, they couldn't force them to come work on those plantations anymore. So they had to go get another set of dark skinned people to come work these lands. And because during those times the Asian countries was going through a thing of colorism. They were using it as a means to kick out their darker population people. And they chose to kick out majority of the males out the country while the paler population stayed back and bred with the females and was trying to breed out the color. Because this is going back to Darwin now. Darwinism. Right? Because through Darwinism and through the Darwinism research, they started learning that after 3 generations, you could dilute what they call is the Negro gene. Okay, just by breeding it out 3 generations. So you're shipping all the men here and you're keeping all the women there. You're killing off all the indigenous men here, and you're bringing in men from other parts of the world to come in. Okay, which goes back to the Tasmanians, right? Australia, when they were that's something else we're gonna get into another time. I don't want to reveal too much. Okay. So yeah, so slavery. The two where were we? Here we were right here in the sugarcane fields in Cuba. Well, after 1884 abolition of slavery in the country, the two scholars of Chinese labor in Cuba, Juan Pastrana and Juan Perez de la Riva, sustained horrific conditions of Chinese coolies in Cuba and stated that coolies were slaves in all but name. Dennis Helly, see, because they have to disguise the fact that these were the slaves. You understand? They have to disguise the fact that these were the slaves in majority. Because they were still, during these times, we were still at war with these people. We still was going to war with them up until the early 1900s, when Indians used to walk into the school and shoot these teachers dead in the head for touching or hitting on their children. Remember, these things were still going on. We were still at war with them. Do your research. Do your research on that part. Also, yeah, the two scholars of Chinese labor in Cuba, Juan Pastrana and Juan Perez de la Riva, sustained horrific conditions of Chinese coolies in Cuba and stated that coolies were slaves in all but name. Dennis Helly is one researcher who believed that despite their slave like treatment, they were slaves. It's not slave like treatment, they were slaves. The free and legal status of the Asian laborers in Cuba separated them from slaves. The coolies could challenge their superiors. Well, Dred Scott did that, but Dred Scott didn't know how to fight his case. And many other slaves that took, even the Amistad ship, not the Africans, the God damn it, the Indians who were mislabeled as Africans on the Amistad ship, the Cubans, right, the Arawaks on the Amistad ship, even they took their captors to court and won. And won. And they sent them back to Cuba. Go look it up in the Cuban archival records. They ain't sent them to Africa. They sent them to Cuba. The free and legal status of Asian laborers in Cuba separated them from slaves. The coolies could challenge their superiors, runaway petition government officials, and rebel, according to Rodriguez Pastor and Trazen, Traz, Trazenges, Trezegnis Granda. Look. Once they had fulfilled their contracts, the colonos interrogated, integrated into the countries of Peru, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. Now, the Dominican Republic is very important because we all know that the whole island is Haiti, Quisqueya, is that or Haiti, the whole island, and where the Dominicans came in is from what is called the Black Order of the Dominican Friars. It's called the Black Order of the Dominican Friars. This is a European order of Dominicans who their head friar came over into Haiti and created the Dominican Republic. Now, the Haitians at that time, before he came, gave these Spaniards refuge because the French and the Dutch was kicking their ass. So they gave them refuge on the island. And in return, they betrayed the Haitians. They betrayed them and took half of the island for themselves and put up, now you see they put up borders and barricades and stuff to stop the Haitians from going over on that side. And their most sacred caves and spots, you see them going, they work in Santeria and voodoo and stuff in front of their spots, and they say that they can still see the spirits of old on the island, and they're not happy that they're there. Like their own voodoo people tell you this. You know what I mean? Their own voodoo people tell you this. So that's where the whole Dominican Republic came from. All right. They adopted cultural traditions from the. Pay attention. When I said it earlier, they took your name, your identity. They took your identity and your ways. They adopted cultural traditions from the natives and also welcomed in non-Chinese to experience and participate in their own traditions before the Cuban Revolution in 1959. And Havana had Latin America's largest Chinatown. Pay attention. So I'll tell you, everywhere you go, there's a Chinatown. I need to go no more into this. Right. So this is what in the United States debates over coolie labor and slavery was key in shaping the history of Chinese immigrants in the U.S. In February 1862, an act to prohibit the coolie trade by American citizens in American vessels, also known as the Anti-Coolie Act, was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln, which prohibited any U.S. citizens and residents from trading in Chinese subjects. known as coolies. So this is the slave trade that they say Abraham Lincoln, this you free the slaves and Chinese subjects known as coolies. In one aspect, the Anti-Coolie Act was the last of the U.S. slave trade laws, as well as the beginning of the end of slavery in the September of that year. Lincoln would also issue the Emancipation Proclamation. In another aspect, it was the beginning of Chinese exclusion in the US and the beginning of federal immigration restriction, which within a decade significant levels of anti-Chinese sentiments had built up. In 1868, the Burlingame Treaty would ensure certain protections for Chinese immigrants in the U.S. and emphasize that any Chinese immigration to the U.S. must be free and voluntary, reaffirming that coolies, being unfree, were unwelcome and prohibited from entering the U.S. in 1875. Congress would pass the Page Act, which prohibited the bringing of any Chinese subjects without their consent in order to hold them for a term of service. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act would bar the entry of any Chinese laborer to the U.S. This is how they do it. They bring them in to replace you, and they use this as an excuse to create the immigration system. And then the ones, the ones of the your relatives, your kinfolk that they pushed out into the Caribbean, they slap immigration strict guidelines on them. You understand? So they had to change the identity, had to change your identity. Because if you still identify with your ancestral identity, none of these stuff, none of this jurisdictional stuff that they have over you goes for you. They can't tell you you can't come here. They can't tell you that you can't leave here. They can't tell you that you can't go from North America down into South America and travel freely back and forth because these, my brothers and sisters, all your ancestral lands. So they had to trick you to believing that they took your ancestors as slaves over from Africa, and this is how you ended up being here, and you were the very first. All that story is bullshit. It's bullshit. They was using these people to try to replace you. Period. That's why I say, like, when we tell history, we must tell history truthfully. These were the conditions of why they had indentured servitude. You know what I mean? These were the conditions to why they had these things. This is what this was for. This was all to colonize, breed out, or create mass confusion of who the indigenous peoples are in the Americas. Right? So I'm not going to sit here and say that some of us don't have a very mixed background in ancestry, but honor your ancestors that were here. You want to honor your other ancestors, go to their homeland and honor them. But while you're here, fight back for their recognition of who they are because they were misplaced throughout history. They were taken from name off of their own land and put somewhere else that they've never probably ever even been, right? And then they had their descendants identifying from somewhere from a faraway land that was not their home. So we must correct history and at the same time correcting history, like, hey, if you find in your genealogy that, hey, um you have an ancestor that was Mongol or so on or so, then that's what it is. Be proud of that. That's your ancestor. If it wasn't for them, you wouldn't be here. Everything, every intricate detail of life connects spiritually, physically, mentally, in all aspect connects. You see what I'm saying? If a tragedy didn't happen there, a miracle would have happened here. You see what I'm saying? Like everything connects. Everything is connected. This is the one, that one piece. This is the one. This is what that one means. Out of one, many. You understand? Because even before the invasion of Spain, we did a lot of business with the Spaniards. So there's some mixing there too as well. So I'm not bashing these folks. I speak with passion, but I'm not bashing because, like I said, it's a lot of folks out there who has mixed background, who has found stuff in their ancestry. You know what I mean? But you still find that you still have ties here also by blood in the Americas. I'm saying right is right and wrong is wrong. It is only right to bring to the forefront of who the ancestors of the Americas were before all of this slavery talk, before all of these things. Who were the first people of the Americas? Stop letting folks come and take your ancestors' identity or misplace your ancestors' identity. Truth is truth. You know now that all these folks treated up with each other to take what the ancestors of the Americas had and to mislead their descendants. Killed off all the males or locked them up and raised the children in their education system and brainwashed them to believe that they're from somewhere else. Then put plants in our communities, like even Umar Johnson is a plant. John Henry Clark, another plant. Plants that tell you one thing, but know that their ancestry is really this, but push something else to you in the public because of their fraternal obligations. This is it. Wake up, people. You know, wake up. Let me do it. Uh, let me do it. Man. 1 second, folks. Let me see if I want to say Dr. Ben is a plant because Dr. Ben told y'all that he's from Africa. He told y'all he's African. You see what I'm saying? He told y'all what he was. You see what I'm saying? He literally told y'all. He's never once said that he's not an African. But John Henry Clark, who's an Indian, pushed everything African. You see what I'm saying? So that to me is what a real plant is. Rastafarian culture or the Rastafarian community, that's a plant. Leonard Howell, the founder of Rastafarianism, who was also taught by an Arab, along with Marcus Garvey, taught by an Arab, Noble Drew Ali, taught by an Arab, Elijah Muhammad, taught by an Arab. These are plants. You understand? Yes, Boule. These are plants. Garvey never been to Africa, but he was pushing back to Africa. He's an Arawak. He's an Indian. But he's pushing back to Africa. Haile Selassie came and told the Rastafarians them that he's not the coming of Jesus. And they still calling him the coming of Jesus. Right? You have Ethiopia and you have Ethiopia. Ethiopia is in the Americas. Ethiopia is over there in the Asian continent. Ethiopia is in the Americas. Know your history. Know the old maps. Do your research. And you see that the whole Rastafarian community has this thing all mixed up and confused. So when they talk about Mama Africa, that's not your mother, that's not your homeland. You're at home. The Americas is your mother. The Most High is your father. Understand this. It's just research, people. Research. Don't let no man tell you nothing and you don't go and look into it. Don't let no man tell you nothing and you don't go and look into it. Look into everything. That is very much so important. You must look into everything. Right? Never take someone's word for anything. Always do your own research. Let's see if this will work. Why isn't it doing it? I'm trying to. Okay, let's see if it will come up in the chat. Trying to give you guys the link. All right, there it goes. That's the link right there to the article that I was reading, and it will give you the links to the others. Let me give you the other link to the other article. Where is it? Historia. Give me 1 second. Okay. That should be coming through now. I said those are the links right there, family. If you guys need the links, they're in the chat. Yeah, I could copy, paste, pull them up, do what you need to do, and it'll take you to another wormhole from there. You know, another wormhole, and it will open you up to a world of information and another aspect of where to do research from. All right. I don't know if any of the other platforms is doing this, but this is it here. That's it. All right. I'm about to get up out of here. I did not know I was on here for this long. Again, it's an honor. It's an honor to give you guys this information. It's an honor to be a part of this community. And I say to you guys, you know, whatever it is that you are doing or going through in life, never let the negative tear you down. Just keep going, keep fighting through, no matter what the odds are, because there's always a light. We go through tests every day. We are tested every day. And a lot of times it's by our closest loved ones, you know, but just keep pushing. This is what it is, even with this information here. You know, some people will laugh, some people, oh no, you don't know what you're talking about. But mind you, 9 times out of 10, those folks have not done no form of research whatsoever. Or they did a little 5-minute search and say, oh yeah, I found everything. But they don't know how to connect the dots or put pieces together of what they're looking for. You understand? So just take your time, keep going, and just do what it is that you got to do. You know what I mean? Honor, Sister Cherokee Tulu. Honor. Sister Judy, honor to you. Brother Lansford, honor. All out too, honor to you. And to you guys, I say peace, love, light, and may the Most High keep you safe, guarded, you know, and in good health. Peace, everyone.